We are dealing with the Pelagian Controversy. Recall, we're working our way through the 86 points of Pelagianism. Did I get to number 11? Did I get that?
Through number 12.
12. The advantage of Christianity, sinlessness made easy. We got that far?
Yeah.
All right. So, number 13, the question came up last time. You may have been wondering yourself how Pelagius would deal with this topic. What's the point of Jesus? Given the fact that people can be perfect, sinless lives are possible within our grasp, that many pagans are in fact saved by their own virtue, it does make one wonder, so what was the point of Jesus? From a Christian point of view, how do we find a place for him in this particular theology? Any thoughts? How do you suppose Pelagius accommodated the importance of Jesus? What is that? What's hiding down here? Oh, I see.
I didn't want to crawl out in the middle. So,
what is it?
it's a pen cap.
It's a pen cap. I got it. You could use it as kind of a hair thing, though.
Looks good.
Like that. I don't know if it's going to stay. I might have to put it up. All right. Does anybody have a theory? Anybody have a theory? What do you suppose? Quiet, please, my friends. Back to work here. Sydney, what do you suppose is the place for Jesus that Pelagius creates?
Well, would he be just a good role model
Yes.
for us to follow and model our actions after?
That's precisely it. Liberalism generally, and Pelagius is one of the great liberals in history, the place they find for Jesus typically is related to his function or value as an example. So I'm supposed to look to him as the one who gives me a model for my own life, and that's the great benefit that he offers. Pelagius wants none of this nonsense about Jesus dying and atoning death on the cross for goodness sakes. Hopefully we got rid of that back in the first century. We're sophisticated, up-to-date 4th century people here. We don't need to have that sort of backwards view of the work of Christ. Rather, he is simply the great role model, and certainly the crucifixion is important because this is the supreme act of self-sacrifice to which we are all called. Right? But this business about dying for our sins and all of that, that's way beneath his dignity. Stephen.
Why would Pelagius even address the whole issue of Jesus? Because wouldn't he not like the whole concept of what Jesus stood for because he claimed to be the Son of God and said that he died for our sins? Wouldn't that be kind of just...
He would say that, as many liberal scholars would, that Jesus says precious little about dying for our sins, and that was probably added later. Jesus basically talks about a life of ethics. You read the Sermon on the Mount, you read nothing about dying for our sins. You read about, what? Turning the other cheek, self-sacrificial living, Jesus says oblique things like he's going to give his life a ransom for many, but even that, Pelagius says, can be construed more than one way. He doesn't have this. He would say, it's more when you get to Paul that you get this sort of atonement theology, and he doesn't like Paul very much, so he sounds a lot like a 19th century liberal. All right, Josiah, sorry.
So would Pelagius say that Christ was just a man and he had no...
No, he actually does allow that that Jesus is divine, that he's now Chalcedon has not happened yet. That's 451. So really, all he's got to work with is Nicaea and a couple of smaller councils after that. But he does allow for the divinity of Christ, but he still understands Christ in more of an example kind of fashion.
Okay, because it kind of seems weird because if you're going to set someone up as an example, it seems like you must have another human just a man as an example.
Yeah.
It seems like it's almost kind of impossible to do what something that was divine can do.
Yeah.
Even though Christ commands us to be perfect like he is, but
Right.
there's a will
but he says that even though Jesus has divinity about him, he's nevertheless living a human life. And he's living a human life relying on the strength of God in the very same way that you can live a human life relying on God's strength. And you do have biblical support for that Jesus acted through the Spirit, and so on. Yeah. All right, the last point, number 14 of the 48 points, or what did I say, 84? Anyway, the 14th, the last one I'm going to give you. I'll relieve you of the rest of them. Is that the human will is totally free. He is one of the great free will champions in church history. The human will is utterly, totally, absolutely unencumbered by any constraint, perfectly free. That means you are able to live a perfect life if you simply choose to. You have that capacity. He doesn't like any ideas of being a slave to sin, as the Apostle Paul says. That kind of thing he doesn't like. Yeah.
Can you repeat number 13?
Number 13, Christ is the supreme example. Pelagius was condemned as a heretic at the Council of Carthage in the year 418. We're not too surprised at that, because who would be the dominant personality in the vicinity of Carthage? Who would be probably the most famous Christian within 100 miles or so of Carthage, Matt?
I think it's Augustin.
This would be Augustin, yes. Hippo is a little town not far from Carthage. So a council is convened in Carthage to deal with the problem of Pelagius, and they, not surprisingly, reach the conclusion that the guy is a flaming heretic, and they condemn him as such. This, however, is not a decision of the church generally. It's not an ecumenical council. This is a minor, more regional council, but it is the one point where, typically we would say he was condemned. So that's Pelagianism. If we're looking at a spectrum, we have Pelagius over here, we have Augustine over here. I want to give you now the Augustinian response. This is in a mere 8 points, but some of the points have subpoints. So, Augustine begins his theological debate with Pelagius by asserting, number one, that man is what Augustine called a certain mass of sin. Sounding somewhat different from Pelagius. A mass of sin. The point of that statement is that from Augustine's point of view, we are shot through with sinful taint. There's no part of you that hasn't been affected by a sinful condition. You could say, if this is the human person, from the point of view of Pelagius, sinfulness is just at the edges. It's peripheral. Or as Aristotle would say, it's accidental. It's on the edges. But down deep inside, Pelagius says you have a heart of gold. We just need to get to it. We just need to find the true you and bring it out and liberate it, and then virtue will reign supreme throughout the earth. That's Pelagius' somewhat naive assessment of the human condition. Augustine, on the other hand, says, sorry, we're corrupt at the edges, we're corrupt here, and the heart is especially corrupt, and the rest of us is not doing too well either. Our entire life is corrupted, radically corrupted. Augustine didn't use this term, but he would be comfortable with the term that is later used by Calvin to stand for the same point. What's the famous phrase from Calvin, which essentially is the same idea, and it would be the notion, Ben?
Total depravity.
Total depravity. Sometimes people think Calvin is saying more than he is. All he's saying is the same thing Augustine said. He's not saying we're incapable of doing things that appear to be virtuous. You know, corrupt people can drive the speed limit. Corrupt people can restrain themselves from robbing the nearest bank. Corrupt people can live with enlightened self-interest. They can live lives of civic virtue. You know, it's possible for someone to do that. But they do it for the wrong reasons. They do it for fundamentally selfish reasons. You don't find people by nature living their lives to the glory of God. You find them living their lives to the convenience of themselves. And they like to appear to be virtuous. It's nice to appear to be virtuous. But down deep inside, you know, something else is going on. So total depravity, massive sin, radical corruption, all of these have to do with this state of being tainted. Second point in Augustine are his three moral states. Three moral states. Virginia, New York, and Wisconsin.
Yeah, Wisconsin.
Not Washington. We had a hope of being a moral state in the last election, but we blew it. So we're still not a moral state. The three moral states are posse, peccare, posse, non peccare, and non posse, non peccare. It's a lot to write. And I don't know why I bother, because you can't read it anyway, but there it is. Posse peccare, posse peccare. Actually, it's good Latin. It's also good Italian. Posse peccare. Anybody take a shot at that? What does that mean in Latin? Go ahead, Jake.
Does it mean able to sin?
It's exactly what it means. Okay. Able, posse, peccare, to sin. So this is the first of Augustine's three moral conditions in which a person might find himself or herself, namely having the ability to sin. Now on that basis, Trevor, we could probably extrapolate what is the meaning of posse non peccare. What does that mean?
Able to not sin.
Exactly. The moral condition of being able not to sin, or able to keep from sinning. And then, Megan, armed with that information, you can easily extrapolate the meaning of the third one, non posse non peccare, and the double negative in Latin, which is permissible, not so good in English. But what would that mean?
It'll be not able to not sin.
Exactly. Not able to not sin. What's the force of that? Put that in your own words, Kayla. If a person is not able to not sin, how might you otherwise state that? What's that person's
You're
situation?
always sinning.
That's right. You can't keep from it. You're constantly unable to not resist. You know, it's like a drug addict. Drug addicts make resolutions over and over. They shoot up or take or snort or whatever is their, ingestion mechanism of choice. And then for a little while they feel good and they say, I'm never going to do that again. I've had it with this way of life. They're feeling good. And at that moment they feel strong. But then, of course, the effect of the drug wears off. And as the effect wears off, the ability to resist diminishes. Until finally they would steal from their own mother to get their next fix. They cannot not sin. And Augustine's argument is that that's the condition of all of us with respect to sin. We are all addicted to that drug. Paul says in Romans chapter 6 and elsewhere, we are slaves to sin. Like an addiction. A person can be a slave to alcohol, they can be a slave to crack, they can be a slave to whatever, but we are all fundamentally enslaved to sin in some form or other. That's non posse, non peccare. Have you had this before? Is this brand new material? You have not had it. Nicole, you've never seen this before? Okay, all right. Oops, I don't want to erase that. Sorry. All right. What? Yeah. That's right. Get it back up there. Wait. You didn't notice that. Not a problem. Well, that rabbit right out of the hat. Okay. Now, what he talks about are the condition of Adam. Here's Adam and Eve. We'll just leave it with Adam. Adam pre-fall. We'll say pre-apple. Post-apple. All right? So what do you think, Spencer? Before the fall, before Adam rebelled against God, did Adam have the posse peccare?
Yes.
Yes, he did. We know he had the ability to sin. What exactly is the reason that we know he had the ability to sin?
Because he did.
He did. And we always know that if someone does something, then they can do it. You know, that follows almost by irresistible logic. So yes, he had the posse peccare. Krista, what do you think? Before the fall, did Adam have the posse non peccare?
Yes.
Yes, he did. And why would you say that?
Because he did it for a while.
That's right. As far as we know, Adam did not sin immediately. We don't think that what happened was that as soon as God said, don't eat the fruit of that tree, that Adam's first act was to run pell-mell across the Garden of Eden as fast as he could, snag one of those apples and take a bite. That would not argue well for him having the posse non peccare. We think he went for a while. We don't know how long. You know, how long did the Garden of Eden last? Who knows? In C.S. Lewis's Paralandra, anybody ever read that? Anybody read it? Do you remember he kind of plays, C.S. Lewis kind of plays with this whole Garden of Eden thing in Paralandra. Do you remember that? No? And he talks about all of the sweet reason that Satan brings, trying to show, you know, he takes the story from Genesis and just multiplies it over, you know, maybe a couple of chapters in this very extensive conversation, making it look so reasonable. He does it, of course, as only Lewis can do it. How about, Alicia, the non posse non peccare? Did Adam, before he sinned, have the non posse non peccare?
I don't think so.
And why do you say that?
Because it wasn't sin. He didn't have a sin nature.
Okay, that's right. He didn't have an impulse towards sin that he could not resist. Okay.
So when did that the sin nature come about? Did it come about when he first sinned or after that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the term sin nature is not biblical. You understand that. But would you make, of course, the term I'm going to give you isn't either. But the term that usually is applied in this is called original sin. Right? The inclination towards sin that is in us. And it is usually understood in mainstream Christian thought as an immediate effect and judgment that came as a result of that act of disobedience. Okay? It's sort of like, I mean, there's a lot of ways to sort of illustrate the idea here, but it's kind of like you digging a hole you can't get out of, or walking into a prison cell and then not being able to escape it. I say to you, Jordan, whatever you do not go into that prison cell. Do not go into it. There's nothing in there for you. It's a bad place. But you see this big piece of what? Cinnamon roll sitting in there, you know? And you say, yeah, but I want the cinnamon roll. I say, Jordan, don't do it. You know, if you walk into that prison cell, it's going to be trouble. Jordan can't, you know, he just comes to the temptation. He goes in. There's not just one cinnamon roll. There's gazillions of cinnamon rolls. There's just jillions of them. But the door slams behind him. He is unable to escape from cinnamon roll hell. You know, he is stuck there. I know that seems oxymoronic to you, but as wonderful as they are, if all you had was to eat was cinnamon rolls for the rest of your life, you would get real tired of cinnamon rolls. You know, you'd give anything for some green beans. You would broccoli, please. You know, but that's what happens. We have chosen sin, and God has made us a slave to the thing we wanted. It's called judgment in kind. He made us a slave to the very thing that we wanted as an act of disobedience. Does that kind of make sense? All right. Adam sins, and then we have a different situation here. Nicole, after the sin of Adam, does he continue to retain the posse peccare?
Yes.
He does. He certainly continues to be able to sin. Avery, after the fall, does Adam maintain the posse non peccare?
At moments, yes. I don't know if that's as a generality, like as a lifelong thing or not.
Okay, what do you think Augustine's answer would be to this?
Probably
It's going to be, okay, probably that was right, yeah. Yeah, so, I know what you're saying, that it seems that at moments people can do virtuous things. They're not always doing ugly, horrific, terrible, offensive things. But Augustine would say that even those times when we're doing things that seem virtuous, they're not motivated by virtuous desires. They're still fundamentally corrupt. Sarah, how about the third one? After the fall, would Augustine say we continue, or do we acquire the non posse non peccare?
Yes.
And that's the whole point. Augustine's definition of original sin, I just gave this term to George a minute ago, but Augustine's definition of original sin, which I may ask you sometime, you never know. I may say, what is Augustine's definition of original sin? I've been known to do this, you know. And the correct answer, the thaumaturgic words. The words that will so delight me that I will be almost irresistibly inclined to put an A at the top of your test without even looking at the rest of it. Because it will so delight my soul. Augustine's definition of original sin is non posse non peccare. The inability to keep from sinning. He doesn't go into the metaphysics of it. Now, the reason I kind of objected a little bit, you may have picked up if you were half awake when Jordan said sinful nature. You know, the reason you'll find that typically that term is not used in more careful discussions of this is that it makes it sound like there's something alien inside us. We have this nature, you know. What is exactly a nature? And even though the term is very popularly used, it does create this kind of ambiguous idea. What Augustine is saying is that it's not a nature, it is you. You are the one who's been infected by this. Your desires have been enslaved to things that are hostile to God and His righteousness. You see, you are a slave to this. It's not a nature, it's you, you know. Now, Paul talks in Romans chapter 7, it's not I, but the sin that dwells in me. And so it does get a little bit dicey there, but at least for Augustine, you know, even that is still representative of who you really are. In yourself, without grace, without God's intrusion. All right, next. We have the three moral states. You've got them. The next one is non-posse, non-mori. M-O-R-I. Non posse, non more. Any idea what that would mean, Sydney? Any thoughts? What would non posse, non more mean, you suppose?
Well, morir means to die. I think.
Correct.
So it's not possible not to die.
Exactly. What did Pelagius say on the subject of our mortality? Remember that? What was Pelagius's theory of mortality? Alicia?
In his second point, he was saying that Adam was mortal, and even if he hadn't fallen, he would have died anyway.
It's right. That's Pelagius's view. Adam was mortal from his birth. He was going to die either way, as all the rest of us would. The traditional Christian view, and certainly Augustine's view, was that death came as a judgment. In the day you eat thereof, you shall surely die. Death comes as part of the negative response of God to our sin, not as a natural condition of our, birth and so on. And so, what Augustine is saying is, as a result of the fall, we lose the ability to stay alive. We may stretch out our time. I have a gal that comes to my Sunday school class at First Presbyterian, who is, just last Sunday, celebrated her 100th birthday. And she's just this lovely, spry little lady, walks in. She's 100 years old. I asked her this yesterday. I said, "You going to go for another 100?" And she says, "Why not? Got nothing else to do." So who knows? Maybe she'll do it. But even she, with all of her good genetics and whatever it is that's kept her alive all that long, is probably going to die someday. As am I, as are you. Ordinary course of events, the Lord not returning and something like that, interrupting all of this. But basically, we're all going to die someday. We can't keep it. We can't keep from it. Howard Hughes famously spent a lot of money hoping to do what to avoid death? Do you know Howard Hughes? Famous guy, very rich. And he did not want to die. He was OCD on steroids by the last few years of his life. Terrified of infection, terrified of germs. He had to go through this incredible ritual to even see him, like paper towels and stuff to touch the doorknobs, all of this. But did anybody know what he was trying to do, Megan?
Well, what he did is he wouldn't let anyone see him, and he lived in this totally sterile house by himself.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, here's what he was doing. He was actually investing heavily in and seeking to determine whether he could be freeze-dried. Like cryogenics, just be frozen, instant frozen, and maybe kept in that state for a couple of 100 years, because he assumed that, hey, in a couple of 100 years, we are going to discover the key to living forever. We just haven't quite gotten there yet. And he thought he had the money, he could, just freeze himself, and then they'd wake him up in a couple 100 years and say, "Here's the pill, pal, you can live forever." And it didn't work out. He actually did die, as far as we know. But people desperately want to stay alive. But Augustine tells us that as a result of the intrusion of sin into our situation, we will never succeed in that. Number 4 of Augustine's theology, the human will is enslaved. Remember that Pelagius said the human will is totally free. Augustine said your will is fully enslaved. You are not free at all. Your choices are determined. They are determined by you, not by external constraints, not by fate. It's not fatalism. Your choices are determined by you and your character, your virtue or lack of it. Now let's... All right, my friends, let me recover your attention while we're finishing up over here. So if you can eat, if you can enjoy this experience of nirvana and still pay some attention to me, I would appreciate it. But we are dealing with Augustine's notion that the will is enslaved. And this is a somewhat subtle point. Hence, it requires a little bit more of your keen attention. He makes a distinction between two expressions in connection with the human will. The first of which is liber arbitrium. And the second is libertas. And this has become classic. This would be substantially agreed to by Luther, by Calvin, by Jonathan Edwards. Generally in the Reformed tradition, this has been accepted as the way it is. And so if you get this, whether you agree with it or not is not material. It's just that you understand it. This is the classic Augustinian understanding of the nature of free will. Liber arbitrium basically simply means free will. But the definition is crucial. Free will is one of those very, very slippery terms. We use it casually. Well, they did that of their own free will. It's a choice they made of their own free will. We rarely put that expression under a microscope and ask, what exactly is that thing that we call free will? What is it? And therefore, because it's so squishy, tends to explain a lot of stuff in a rather strange way. Augustine's definition of free will is, so this is what you want to know, and these are the best words to capture it. The ability to choose what you want the most. The ability to choose what you want the most. I might add, and you might want to add a little asterisk, footnote, clarifying remark. For Augustine, free will is not only the ability to choose what you want the most, but he would also say you invariably do choose what you want the most at any given moment. Now, he understands. I mean, I might say, well, I choose to have $1 million. I can make a choice. He means among the things that are actually rationally available to you at any given moment. I choose to fly by flapping my arms. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean I can make that choice and have it work out that way. But he means in terms of the circumstances of your life. You are all, at least as far as I can tell right at this moment, ingesting little delicious morsels of cinnamon roll. And Augustine would say the reason you are doing this is because you want to. You're not under compulsion. You are doing what you are freely choosing to do, but in fact at this very given moment, it's what you want to do the most. That's why you're doing it. So your free choice, please get this, is determined by your strongest desire at the moment of the choice. Free will is determined by you. Now, if you can get your brain wrapped around that, it'll help solve a lot of puzzles as far as the ongoing debate down through church history about the nature of free will and so on. It's interesting, for example, that one of the ways of defining freedom is self-determination. You ever heard that expression? Self-determination. If a person is self-determined, that's virtually a synonym for being free. Right? Well, Josiah, he's self-determined. Meaning he's not being determined by somebody else. Somebody else isn't setting the agenda for his life. He's determined by himself. But notice the term itself is self-determination. He is determined, but the thing determining him is himself. He's self. He be determined by himself, I guess. And Augustine would say, and this is the point where people usually get a little bit juiced up, you always, 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 at any given moment, whenever you exercise the power of choice, you will always invariably choose what you want the most at that moment. No exceptions. That's what makes you free. You will never choose against your strongest desire at the given moment. Sometimes people choose things they would prefer not to choose for a variety of reasons, but they don't. It doesn't mean they don't want it the most at the time. Somebody might put before me, cinnamon roll, carrot sticks. Which one, Avery, do you suppose I want the most? Probably the cinnamon roll is correct. Someone might say, well, sometimes people, even though they want the cinnamon roll the most, will still take the carrot sticks. Therefore, Augustine's wrong. Right? I want the cinnamon roll the most, but I'm going to take the carrot sticks. How would Augustine respond to that? It's not a particularly difficult response to make, but what would it be, Stephen?
Probably just make the argument that you want good health the most.
Sure. Because the carrot sticks are not simply the carrot sticks, they are everything that is attached to the carrot sticks, namely a sleek physique, like you see that I obviously possessed of, and other such things. So, in other words, even though if all things were, all things being equal, I might want the cinnamon roll more than the carrot sticks, if there are other advantages to the carrot sticks that weigh into my choice, then obviously I'm still choosing what I want the most, namely sleek body, right? Good health, low cholesterol, not to die tomorrow of an occlusion of the arteries. I mean, those things might actually, not that Laura would serve anything that would occlude anybody's arteries, but do you see the point? Y'all see that? Please see that, in this moment of levity. I don't want you to miss this. Augustine's argument has been a potent one indeed, is that at any given moment you always choose according to your strongest inclination at that moment. It can change. Your inclinations can change over time. Right before Thanksgiving dinner, I want Thanksgiving dinner the most. How am I doing after I've been eating nonstop for 45 minutes? Then do I still want Thanksgiving dinner? No. See, desires change based on a whole lot of variables. But at any given moment, there is something I want the most, and that's what I will invariably choose. That would be Augustine's argument. We're running out of time, so I'm going to leave this little trial balloon in the air. I'd like you to come up with a counterexample if you can. So I'm going to ask you the question tomorrow when you come back. Can anyone come up with an example of somebody, a scenario, a hypothetical, in which a person chooses against their strongest inclination at the moment of the choice? I don't want to do it now because we've got less than a minute. So if you got a good example, Ben, hang on to it.
We have the class tomorrow.
Don't we have class tomorrow?
No.
Oh, we don't, for Pete's sake. What is this? You don't need choir. Just come here,
We're actually setting up for our Thanksgiving.
You're setting up for Thanksgiving. Oh, that's even better. That's nice. I like that. That's okay. I will. On second thought, I see. I've got illumination happening to me. All right. Listen to me. Listen. Stop talking and listen to what I'm about to say, since I won't see you again for a week. Right? I want you to come back next Monday. You've got all Thanksgiving to think about a counterexample. Come back with your best example of someone choosing against their strongest desire at the moment. Goodbye.